Hey everyone, it's Troy. A quick word before we start today's episode. The following conversation has not been fact-checked, nor is it rooted in scientific evidence. But I believe we all have a story, and that we deserve to have those stories told without fear of judgment. So, as you listen to this conversation, please keep an open mind and sit back and enjoy. Thank you.
I couldn't see ahead and I couldn't really see below the torso. I just saw this body, like a military green, olivey drab color. I remember feeling bad for the thing because it looked hunched, like it didn't feel like it belonged there. And there was this feeling of they weren't there to like celebrate me, but it was a reunion, and started to realize that this was the first time I remember, but this wasn't the first time.
Welcome to Seacoast Stories, a podcast about the people, businesses, and newsmakers that make the Seacoast an American hidden gem. I'm Trey Farkas, and on today's episode, how Mike Stevens became the area's top UFO expert and why he's using his 40-plus UFO encounters to give back. Today's story starts on September 19th, 1961. Betty and Barney Hill were driving through the White Mountains, headed south on Route 3. Sometime after 10 p.m., on their way back home to Portsmouth, they saw a strange light in the sky. According to legend, Betty then grabbed a pair of binoculars to check it out. Immediately, she thought it was a flying saucer, while Barney believed it was a plane. But when the object made a sudden rapid movement, he realized this was no airplane. Wanting to get a better look, the couple continued driving and driving and driving. They didn't get home until 5 a.m., and they didn't quite remember what had happened in the hours between. Hesitant to discuss what they saw with anyone outside of their inner circle, Barney finally agreed to see a psychiatrist a few years later. While undergoing hypnotic regression, he recalled the memories that had eluded him for years. How he boarded the alien spaceship, came in contact with the beings, and even how he got medically examined by them. From that point, their story took off. The Barney and Betty Hill incident established the blueprint for alien abductions as we know them today. Before then, sci-fi had depicted aliens as affable, jumpsuit-wearing creatures, but this incident, the first alien abduction ever reported in this country, painted a different picture. And it's a picture that today's guest is all too familiar with. Mike Stevens is the founder of Granite Sky Services, which provides abduction support to those who have experienced what Betty and Barney did. Mike also has some stories to tell, and he'll be doing so on August 31st at the annual Exeter UFO Festival. Yes, that is a thing. Because the town of Exeter, along with the entire state of New Hampshire, has a rich history of UFO sightings, which is exactly where the show begins today.
The history goes back before it was even a state. I mean, there's been reports of things coming in and out of like the Ospey Lakes and that region forever. But the big incidents in New Hampshire that everybody knows about are, of course, the Betty and Barney Hill case, which happened in September of 1961. So there's a lot of history right there. And then we move into the Exeter Festival that happened in 1965 on September 3rd. A young man, Norman Muscarello, was walking back from his girlfriend's house in Amesbury, Massachusetts. He had made it to Kensington, and that's when a huge red light swooped over him. For years, he said he dove into the ditch for protection. Years later, he came out and said he was so scared he tripped over his 2 feet and fell in the ditch and decided to lay there until he thought the coast was clear. He got up, he ran to a neighboring farmhouse, pounded on the door. Nobody answered. It turned out they heard them, but it was like midnight. They weren't answering the door for somebody just pounding crazily. So a car came up. He was able to flag that car down, got a ride to the Exeter station, and that's where he started telling the dispatch officer what he had just happened. They'd known him from around town, and they couldn't believe what he was saying, but they could tell he was visibly shaken, that something had to happen. It just couldn't be what he was describing. It was about that time that Officer Bertrand came into the station and heard this, and he had just got off a call on Route 101. There was two females in a car. They were kind of frantic, and they'd said they had been chased for 12 miles down the highway by a bright red object. So he calmed him down, sent him on his way, thought they were a little kooky, but then he gets into the station and hears this and decides to bring Norman back out there. They get out there, they don't see anything, so they hop over into the paddock. And as they're in there looking around, this object reappears from the tree line behind the paddocks and the horse farm and starts making its way towards them. Bertrand goes back to his service training, drops to a knee, pulls out his revolver, goes to grab Norman, who is frozen in terror, drags him back out to the car. At this point, Second Officer David Hunt shows up. All three men witness it. Its closest, they said, it was about 100 feet from them. It was about 100 feet wide, and it was glowing so brightly that it was reflecting off the neighboring farmhouse. And that's kind of the basic story of that.
Wow. And did this story at the time get any public notoriety? Were people talking about this, or did it just kind of get swept under the rug?
So after they reported it, the chief was off. He didn't get in until Monday and had to, come on and deal with all this, what had happened. So they called Pease Air Force Base to be like, did you guys have anything going on? Stuff like that. And they're like, could you please not tell anybody about this? But it was too late. The union leader had already got a hold of the story and interviewed the men, because how the systems worked back then, the police station and the hospital were connected through the same lines. So word got around really quick about what was going on.
Wow, that's insane. I won't go too deep into that story because I don't want to spoil it for those who want to attend the festival. Let's get to your story, Mike. Can you tell me about the first time you ever saw a UFO?
So I was about 3.5 years old. We're at my grandmother's house in South Hampton, New Hampshire, and there was some type of family function going on. I remember aunts, uncles, like extended family there. And the way my grandmother's house was set up, you went in through the kitchen, and then there was a dining room right off, and behind the dining room was like a 3-season porch that overlooked the backyard and the woods and stuff. And as soon as I walked by the dining room, that 3-season porch, there was this immediate internal calling, like, you have to get outside, you have to get outside. I don't remember how I got outside, but next thing I know, I found myself standing in the driveway, and my cousin was standing out there. She's only 6 months older than me, and the chances of one of us getting out the door is pretty unlikely. The chance that two of us did that's a mystery in itself, because we were watched like hawks. But so me and my cousin, we find ourselves standing out in the driveway looking at each other like we don't know what we're doing. The next thing we know, the wood line behind my grandmother's lawn just starts glowing bright red. All you can see is like the shadows of the trees. This light starts rising, and it finally breaks the tree line, and that's when we can first see this object appear. And it's your classic, saucer-shaped object. I don't know what else to call it, kind of domed at the top, domed at the bottom. From there was a large tree at the end of my grandmother's driveway. It floated over towards that. And I say floated because it was almost like if you threw a paper airplane, there's no engine or punching the gas where it takes off. It just kind of floated over, not parked on the ground, but just hung itself in the air next to this tree. And at this point, that's when we got the closest look at it. And like I said, it was that dome saucer shape, but there was a row of lights around the middle with not like bulbs, but the colors almost swirled, but it was a flashing pattern of softer whites, light blues, things like that. And while we were staring at that, we felt like we were being stared at, and it, was getting intense and almost a primal type fear of what this shouldn't be happening type thing. The next thing we know, that light bar started changing colors to oranges and reds and flashing faster and faster and faster. And when that happened, almost like when you open your car door at night, some type of interior light came on in this thing with a soft yellowy light. And when that happened, you could make out a row of windows above this light bar. And in those windows, you couldn't see any features or anything, but you could see the shadows of shoulders and heads of something. And then in my standing memory, there was a gap The next thing I remember, this object was at the other end of the driveway by the street, kind of sat above a telephone pole for a minute, and then just all of a sudden just shot off into nothingness into the sky.
Do you have any recollection of interacting with these beings that you saw?
It would be much later in life, probably around when I was 29-ish, that I would go get hypnoregression for that event to see what happened in the middle, because I always felt something happened in the middle. I didn't think, I just forgot that it moved from one end of the driveway to the other. Right. And in that regression, it's still really a lot of fear with it. He wasn't necessarily an abduction, regressionist. He was more a sensation, quit smoking, lose weight type guy. But we had got tied in with him through some other stuff. So he's like, oh, well, give it a try. And,
So you just described that story. Remember, you're 3-ish years old. No one remembers anything in any detail from that time in their lives. That was a very vivid description. So is this something you uncovered in hypnoregression therapy?
Oh, no, it's been with me the whole time.
Really?
Yeah. Most of your audience won't see, but I'm not a small guy, but I've always been like the post child for the hide behind your mother's, leg type guy. I always had anxiety, social, this and that because of this incident and others that followed.
And your cousin that experienced this with you, do they remember this?
So we grew up with the surface conversation of, hey, remember the UFO we saw? Yup. And kind of left it at that. So after I had the regression and kind of filled her in on what I remembered, I was like, all right, I need to talk to her and see what she remembers. And she starts telling me about a different time I had forgot about it until she said it. We're at my grandmother's house again, but in my mind, we were older. We were about 9 or 10 when this happened. We were sitting, she had a farmer's porch that kind of wrapped around the whole house. And we were sitting out there looking across the neighbor's yard, not across the street, but the house like next to it. And this red light came into the sky. And like once it noticed us or we noticed it, however it works, it started making like figure eights and dancing. It was definitely nothing a piloted, or piece of machinery could do. And we watched that, and it was kind of like more of a beautiful, like, oh, that was a cool moment type thing. And that's what she remembered. But I continued to have more like UFO stuff growing up. And she started to have more like psychic stuff. She'd be like in my grandmother's living room talking to herself. And they'd be like, who are you talking to? And then she'd describe somebody in so much detail. They're like, oh my God, that's your great grandmother. So she had more things like more psychic-y or mediumship type stuff going on. And then I just kind of stuck with more of the UFO type experiences.
Okay, we'll talk about the bits and piecing and the hypnoregression therapy because that's something I've never heard of and I'm curious to find out about. But first, so you had this experience when you were so young. Was it something that you would kind of just filed away, or was it something that was continuously haunting you or something that you were thinking about as you were growing up?
It was one of those things you thought was just part of life, or I thought was just part of life until you get around like 6 and you start going to school and, interacting with other kids and stuff. And you're like, oh, nope, this isn't happening to everybody.
Were you telling this to the other kids?
Yeah. I mean, it was front and forward. It was, my mother now even says he's always just talked about UFOs. We never knew why until,
Okay. And what was the reaction that you were getting when you were telling your parents, other kids, teachers?
We grew up in one of those households where you could talk about ghosts. That was on the table. My grandfather's house was haunted, forever. Things happened. Everybody had seen stuff at some point.
Like what?
So at my grandfather's house, it was mostly like footsteps upstairs because that's where my great-grandmother passed away and things like that. So they were just like, it's family, it's ghosts, it's whatever. That was open discussion, but nobody talked about UFOs. So I think they just kind of, you and your cousin saw it, yep, go away, pat you on the head. And, it wasn't really brought up.
So socializing with the other kids, did you feel that you were different from them?
I did, and for other reasons as well, just because I had, once you figure out, all right, not everybody's gone through this, but then just my anxiety and social anxieties on top of it. There was a time in 3rd grade, I was so embarrassed to like draw any attention to myself that I had to go to the bathroom but didn't want to raise my hand and ended up peeing myself. Like my anxiety was that bad.
Wow. Okay, so you've had multiple experiences, not just that one at age 3. What else have you seen?
A lot of stuff and a lot of different demeanors. So like probably about 2 years ago, this one happened. I was out camping on Pawtuckaway Lake, and I'd done all my stuff, got my firewood, set up camp, and it was done for the day. I was just sitting there relaxing, having my fire. The next thing I know, I was just in a piece of woods. I have no idea how I got there or where I was, but I could see like a tree had fallen up ahead. And I said, all right, I'm going to walk up to that tree, sit down, kind of collect my thoughts and figure out what's going on. And when I got up to the tree, I could see like a clearing. And in that clearing, there were like 5, if you took a piece of plywood, double that, but they looked like black glass. I don't know if they were attached to each other or not. I can only say what I saw. But they just kind of hanging in the air, almost in a line. And I said, well, I don't want to go that way. So I picked a direction and walked for about 45 minutes, finally found a shoreline. Luckily, I recognized the patch of shoreline because there was some trash on it I'd seen earlier in the day. So from there, I knew how to walk back and get to camp and made it back to camp. The fire was out, but it wasn't real big to begin. So I don't know how I got there, how much time I spent out there. But yeah, that was like the first time I never got brought back or close to back. So
Wow. Have you ever stopped to think with these multiple experiences, why me? Why? Obviously, other people deal with this too, but you seem to have had multiple experiences with it.
yeah, I believe it runs in families, but why our family, I don't know. So it was about 2008, I decided I was going to start a petition, which is what all New Hampshire state historical markers need to go through. That's their beginning process for the Betty and Barney Hill marker. So that went through, and, after it took 3 years, and I got Kathleen Martin, the Hill's niece, involved, and she was able to really push it through and get the documentation, things we needed. But so when news of that went around the family, that's when stories started coming out of the woodwork. My great uncle was kicked out of Brewster Academy up in Wolfboro, New Hampshire in the 60s for claiming he was abducted by aliens. The school said it was either drugs or a mental issue. Either way, we're not equipped to handle it. My parents have seen a UFO, like down by Hampton Beach. Not just, there's something in the sky, like one where they pulled the car over and, so did the 12 cars in front of them and everybody's out there going, what is that type thing? My kids have all seen stuff. My grandfather, so he lived in New Jersey, so we'd go down once a summer to go visit, and he was really big on us kids reading. And so there was Bud Hopkins' Intruders, and it was above my reading level at the time, but I'm like, no, I have to have this book. He's rolling his eyes at me, and you sure, kind of, you really want that book and all this stuff. And then turns out when he passed, he had this huge collection on the Roswell crash and stuff that he never told anybody about. So
wow. Okay. There's so much to chew on here. This is incredibly fascinating. That rolling of the eyes that he gave you and probably many other people have given you through the years when you talk about this stuff, how does that make you feel?
At first it was harder, because it's like the judgment, especially when you're younger, high school, 20s, you want to fit in, you want to be with friends, you want, For so long, I felt like I didn't have anybody to turn to, and I just decided, I don't care what people think of me. I'm not talking to you then. You're not the one who needs to hear this. I'm saying it for the one who needs to hear, hey, you're not alone, and,
And what career track were you on when you were high school age, and then beyond that, what were you trying to do?
General labor, factory work or construction, things like that.
Okay. And then, so when you helped establish this historic marker, why did you feel that was necessary?
I felt that it was just because it didn't fit into, everybody's narrative of normal or anything, that it didn't need to be remembered. It's a big thing we do with the group we run. Like, first and foremost, it's about helping people. But after that, it's about preserving the UFO history in the area, just because it needs to be remembered. Because the more we remember it, the more we can normalize it, the more we can help people and bring this into a bigger conversation.
Yeah. And we'll talk about Granite Sky Services in a moment, which is so fascinating and cool that you're doing. The regression therapy that you were speaking about. I mean, a lot of people have a traumatic experience and they suppress it. They run away from it. They don't want to think about it ever again. But oftentimes the way to get through that hurdle is to face it directly, confront it head on in something like you were doing. So can you describe to me what this hypnoregression therapy is and what it entailed for you and ultimately what it did for you?
Yeah. So it's basically, they lull you into a sense of comfort, and you're not thinking about anything, or you're not thinking about what you're saying. It almost ends up that you're watching a movie in your own head and you're just telling them what you're seeing type thing. What it revealed for me was, I remember being in some type of ramp, and I remember coming up the ramp, and then in the corner, I couldn't see ahead and I couldn't really see below the torso. I just saw this body that was like a military green, olivey drab color. Not drippy, but it looked wet, like it had a sheen to it. And all you could really see with this torso, and it was holding this arm kind of like crunched up. But unlike our arm, it almost had like an extra piece of bone between the wrist and the forearm, like kind of like a chicken wing almost. That was in the corner, and in the regression, I remember feeling bad for the thing because it looked hunched, like it didn't feel like it belonged there. And the next thing I remember, I don't remember if I was floating or on something. I couldn't feel anything under me, but I wasn't standing up anymore. I was just kind of in this well-lit but not super bright room. And there was this feeling of, they weren't there to like celebrate me, but it was a reunion. And started to realize that this was the first time I remember, but this wasn't the first time. And it was not like with medical instruments. I didn't see any of that during the regression, but it felt like a checkup. And then there was a lot of commotion down by my feet, and I could sense stuff by my head too, like one by each shoulder and one by my head. But most of the commotion was down by my feet, and it seemed like the ones up by my head and shoulders were more of a distraction, just trying to. So when I finally got the chance to break away and like look down, see what all the commotion was down by my feet, that's when I realized they were working on my cousin. And then I snapped myself out of the regression and like just broke down.
And to be clear, this regression is in regards to your first encounter.
Right, to that gap in the missing.
Wow, that's insane. What did it feel like emotionally to recall that in that moment?
It was tough, but it was, it wasn't a clear, all right, here's every page of what happened, but it was enough to be like, yeah, that really happened. And it was terrifying, but a relief at the same time. It was a mix of emotions.
Yeah, a relief to know finally the answer to the question that you've been wondering for so long.
Right. And I'm not against regression, but I do tell people take it very seriously, because once you open a door, you don't know what's behind it, and you can't shut that door once you've opened it.
And is this common among other people who have had UFO encounters, that they remember certain details of it and then there's parts of it that they block out from memory like you had?
Yeah, a lot of people, like with me, I get a lot of beginnings and a lot of ends, not a lot of middles. Some people get more middles, but I don't really know a lot of people who can tell you from start to finish. I mean, you can make educated guesses along the way or say, I think this happened, but for the most part, nobody's got a from start to finish recall of it.
And what are the theories as to why that's the case?
Well, it seems to be a double. One, your own mind's protecting you from stuff, so it's trying to just rationalize something it can't even process to try to, so you can get through your life. And they seem to do some type of forced amnesia on you too. They don't want you to remember, which makes me think they're not horrible. We just don't understand it, because if they didn't, they wouldn't try to block it from us if they really didn't care.
Right. The common exploration in sci-fi is you get abducted and you're laying on a table and they're doing something to you, kind of like you described. After these experiences, did you notice anything different? Did your body, was it marked up in any way? Did you physically feel differently?
Yeah, I think I have an implant in my leg. Sometimes it moves around, but sometimes I can really feel it. Sometimes I can set off a K2 meter with it.
What's that?
So K2 meter, it's an electrical tool, but they're really widely used now in the paranormal investigations.
Oh, okay.
It's an EMF reader. But so sometimes that'll set that off.
Have you ever gotten any x-rays or anything of that nature that would show that implant?
No, just insurance-wise, can't really, go down and pay for an X-ray for
Coming up, the emotional scars these encounters have left on Mike, and why he wants to help others get through their trauma. Stay with us. This is Seacoast Stories. Hey everyone, it's Troy. A quick word from me, and then we'll get right back to today's story. On last week's episode, Amy Tilton and I talked about community. For a refresher, this is what she said.
It just means being a part of things. And I think it's so crucial to our mental health and the health of our society that we feel beholden to other people and that we feel happy to be around other people and that we feel we can be ourselves with other people.
Amy nailed it, and I believe deeply in what she said. Feeling connected to and cared for by others matters more than anything. It matters more than your job title, the size of your bank account, how big your muscles are, and how fancy your vacations are. And this podcast is my attempt at bringing the Seacoast closer together. The more we tell these stories, the more people will feel a part of something and like they can be themselves. And then the community will get stronger. So, to join me on this mission, I ask that you please do me one favor. Share this episode with someone in your life. If you do that, we can slowly bring the Seacoast closer together, one pod at a time. Thank you so much for doing that and for being here today. I really appreciate it. Now back to today's story. At Granite Sky Services, you offer support. I was going to say counseling, but maybe support is the better word, to people who have had similar experiences to you. When did you first get the idea for this?
So 2011, we started hosting meetings that were just basic talks for anything UFO subject related, whether, people had theories, what crop circles, anything semi-related. And we did that for a few years. And then at some point, we still did those, but it's like, that's not what I want, though. That's not helping anybody. That we're just, adding more fodder to the situation. So from there, I kind of switched gears and said, we'll still do that, but I'm going to start a support group and we're going to have something just for experiencers.
And is that something you need to have any degrees or certifications for?
No, and that's why I don't use counseling. It's just support. My only qualification is I've been there. I don't.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe this is private, sensitive information, so you don't have to tell me, but what happens in these support groups, and you do one-on-one sessions too? What's the layout of it?
It depends. It's different with everybody because it depends, one, how many or how people feel about their experiences. Because say me and you were sitting here and something happened, we could both see the same thing but react very differently to it. So you have to see where they're at with it themselves and what they're going through. And a lot of times it's just knowing that they have somebody to talk about who's not going to judge them and that they can get it off their chest makes the biggest difference. And for a lot of it, if they don't know me or don't know my story, I'll just kind of lay out a bunch of stuff real quick and be like, I'm not going to think you're crazy. Or, it's hard to beat, if on that crazy scale of opinions there.
Yeah, you're very comfortable talking about all this stuff that is really mind-blowing. The people that are in your support groups may not be as comfortable, may feel that they are judged when they talk about this stuff. Is this a common thing that comes up in your discussions, that people don't feel like they can talk about this with anyone?
Yeah, absolutely. And, when we get somebody new, if it's a bunch of regulars, we all kind of know everybody's story and stuff, it's real easy to talk. But then for somebody new to come in, to them, they don't know, everybody's story and they've just got theirs. But so we'll ask them, if you're comfortable and want to share, go for it from the start. You don't have to say a word the whole meeting if you don't want. But usually once the conversation gets going, it just comes in natural and they kind of assess the situation, go, all right, this isn't a joke. These people are for real. And,
And now that you've come across so many people's stories in addition to your own, are there any common threads that you can point to, things that seem to happen, or is each situation, its own thing, completely unique novel?
There's similarities that do run across the board, but we're also finding, this is why I love doing the group meetings, things that are not in any of the literature. You know, for years it was, this is a cookie cutter abduction. This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. And if your story didn't match that, well, you're making it up. Or if your story didn't match it, oh, you're copying. But so now we're starting to see things that aren't in any of the literature. Somebody's like, I don't even know if this belongs here, but I'm just going to throw it out because it's weird or whatever. And then somebody from across the room will be like, oh my God, I had that happen. Or somebody will come in 2 weeks later, never met the other person, say the exact same thing. And so the phenomenon itself seems to be much wider than anybody ever anticipated it. So finding those commonalities that we didn't even know were things, let alone common, I find really impressive.
And are these experiences, is there an uptick in this recently? Has it been constant? Just historically speaking, where are we at in terms of the prominence of these kinds of stories?
So I think from like my generation and before, a lot more of the abduction type things were definitely physical interaction with beings. That still happens, but we're getting more reports now of like a spiritual or non-physical abduction too, where people feel they're being pulled out of their body. They're seeing the aliens and stuff, but it's more in a dreamlike, non-physical state.
That's the first time you used the word alien in this conversation. Is there any specific connotation to that word that makes you hesitant to use it?
I personally try to use the word being. It sounds silly, but as a respect towards them, because I don't know what they are, what their intentions are, good, bad, or anything. And alien, anything can be an alien. An idea can be alien. So I try to not use that word, but it does slip out.
And why do you feel you need to respect them?
To respect the topic itself. We're still trying to fight the old stereotype that this only happens in trailer parks and this and that, and things like that. So I think the more, even if the story itself is outlandish, if we can approach it groundedly, I think it just helps try to get people to realize, oh, wait, there's something, this is worth listening to, even if I don't believe.
Are you still dealing with any of the emotional ramifications of the experiences that you've had throughout your life?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was 3 months ago now. We were up camping, me and my girlfriend, in the White Mountains. And we didn't see anything in the sky or anything at first. And it was getting late. It was like 10:30 or something. And I got up to do something and I was looking up at the sky and I saw like there was a light in the sky about that big, which is way too big to be a star, too big to be a planet. And so I'm trying to get her attention to look at that. And she's at the same time, she's noticing lights on the ground, trying to get my attention to look at that. And we're both like frustrated with each other. Like, I don't care what you're looking at. Look at what I'm. And then we realized that something was going on. So in the sky, about 5 of these objects ended up appearing and they were spotlighting the ground. They were lighting up acres of forest and just like doing a search grid, for lack of a better, I don't know what they were doing, but that's what it looked like. We went to bed terrified. She's got a history as well as, me. So we didn't know like, oh, are we next? Or, dog was whining, it was like a really tense moment because nothing that we know of or in our memory happened to us, but it happened just adjacent enough that it re-triggered everything else. For me, where I've had what I'd call positive encounters and ones that I hate to say negative, the impact on me was negative, but I don't know that their goal was to be negative. So to me, seeing a light in the sky is probably the most terrifying part because you don't know whether it's good or bad or anything. Usually when I'm with them, it's not as bad because they're doing something to try to calm you, it seems.
How many experiences have you had?
I think we put 40 something in the book and
Wow.
we left out ones that, were just like, it doesn't really add anything or take away. I don't know. It's been a lot.
You mentioned your girlfriend and the experience you shared. This is something I have to ask. I'm in the dating scene right now, and so I think a lot about how does one conduct oneself on first dates? What are the skeletons you keep in your closet? What don't you bring up? So I'm curious to know your first date with your girlfriend. did you just come straight out and say, yes, I've had these alien experiences?
Where I'm out in the open and stuff with my stuff, she already knew. So, yeah, I got lucky on that one. But I do know people who've, got into a new relationship, told them, like, yeah, whatever, that's fine. And then had something happen while they were laying in bed and been like, I'm out of here. They're done. And that's the other part about it. People don't realize, like, it affects you. Obviously, you're trying to deal with it, but like, you don't get a free pass from life. You still got to you got to go to work, pay your bills and this and that. And it affects you all the time. Like it affects your family because you're not just an experiencer and abductee when it's happening. From that moment on, you are the rest of your life because it's this constant worry of when
Wow. Yeah. That's got to be something that's in the back of your mind at all times. When's the next time?
Yeah.
Wow. And your girlfriend also having her own experiences before, I'm sure that was something you could bond over.
Yeah. We've had a bunch of weird stuff happen together, and we always blame the other ones. Like, oh, those are yours.
At Granite Skies, the slogan is, it's about people, not proof. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, because there's kind of been a split in ufology itself. You have your nuts and bolts people, and you have your people who are a little more looser than that. But, they always want some form of proof to even be considered in it. And experiencers, they don't get taken at their word until somebody else grabs their story and then can make money off it, or a movie, or, But so they don't like to listen to the actual experiencer, except for when it's beneficial. And or unless they can prove something, or, and we didn't want anybody to have to prove anything. There's no basis, for proof. Your story's not better than my story, or we're all in here for the same reason. You just want you to be able to get through the day. We don't have a UFO problem. We don't have a alien problem or extraterrestrial problem. We have a people problem. That's what we're trying to get people comfortable enough so enough people can come forward to make this more of a topic so people can get help. Even if we're all wrong, something's happening and it's causing trauma, which physically affects your brain and the way it operates. And these people, for the most part, are going untreated, either self-medicating, which becomes a loop and a thing, and then our own military, these guys come back and they don't get the help they need. It's 22 veteran suicides a day, which is too much. So if you take that number and then go to an abductee or an experiencer who has zero help, you're literally, it's an intervention to help people before it comes to that crossroad.
We spoke about New Hampshire's rich UFO history. And New England overall seems to have a pretty rich history. Is this area of the United States more prone to UFO sightings than other areas of the country, or is it kind of evenly dispersed?
I think you can find activity no matter where you go. So one of the theories out there by a great researcher named Dean Merchant, who's based in New Hampshire, is that if you follow the 509th Bomb Wing, UFO activity follows it. So the 509th Bomb Wing was in Roswell in 1947. It moved out to Pease Air Force Base.
Which is the site, Roswell is the site of perhaps the most famous American UFO site.
Right. When it moved out to Pease Air Force Base, that's when Betty and Barney Hill happened. That's when the Exeter happened. Then they moved out again and UFO activity followed there. But yeah, New England's got some of the best stories. You got the Allagash abductions out of Maine, Betty and Barney Hill in New Hampshire.
What happened in Maine?
It was 4 guys, 2 twin brothers and 2 friends, went way up into the Allagash camping for like a week. They decided they're going to go fishing. So they built a big bonfire so they could find their campsite. Went out, had a big light come in, chase them. They all panicked and, tried to paddle the canoe back, got back. The fire was out. They were like discombobulated kind of. And it was after the trip that they started, like memories started dripping in. And then they ended up getting regressions and found the abduction.
Wow. I'm curious, Mike, when you're out and about in the world, just meeting people at functions, parties, events, whatever it is, and they ask you, hey, Mike, what do you do? What do you say?
It depends. You read people first a little bit and see whether you think this is going to go negative or positive and kind of pick your answer. And you go, I don't know, I'm into some weird stuff. But I mean, I've usually don't go out to a lot of situations where I don't know people or they don't know what I'm about either. So it's not too much of a deal.
And can a UFO sighting, I mean, you've described out in the woods at your grandmother's house, it can happen anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, everybody thinks, the bedroom situation of being pulled out of your bedroom, and that is one of the main scenarios where it happens. But number 2 is driving. People don't realize that. Yeah, where they find themselves either, the car either pulls itself off to the road or they see a light, and then the next thing they know, they're driving, but they're, 20 miles down the road. And there are things like road hypnosis and things like that, but it doesn't cover all of the situations.
Wow. So you really must be on edge at all times.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you're just like, you're not, knock on wood. You don't want to be like, I have to come, they come. But you kind of be like, all right, whatever at some point. But it's always when you're ready for it, it doesn't happen. It's always when you're not ready or like it'd be the worst time. It's like, oh, of course.
Now, dumb question. You can't have a conversation with one of these beings that you come in contact with.
I can't, or not that I know of or recall, but some people have claimed to.
If the next time this happens, let's say you can communicate with them, what would you say?
I think the question that everybody would, why? Or if not why me? But I think the why is more important because then you can figure out why you or not. But yeah, just why or what. It's like we tag animals to help them, and it must be as they don't know what's going on. They get tranked, get a tag in their ear, and all that. So it could be very similar to that. It could just be they're monitoring us for whatever reason. Kind of think they don't like us with the nukes, kind of like make sure the kids don't play with the matches type thing. Because I don't know, obviously it'd be devastating here, but we don't know what that would go out into the atmosphere and do. So they might be, I think so that might be some of it. There's for 100, you could ask 100 people, get 100 theories, and 100 of us could be wrong on that.
Wow. So just thinking more big picture, zooming out to the entire universe, you definitely believe that there's other beings out there that we are not alone in this thing.
Oh yeah. And I mean, are they from outer space? Are they from another dimension? Or are they us from the future coming back? There's a lot of theories out there, and I'm not like dead set on one yet. Yeah. I just know something's happening.
Wow. Well, I've vastly enjoyed this conversation. Couple more for you. So at the Exeter UFO Festival, again, at the end of August, I haven't been, but from what I've gathered about the event, it's kind of a mixture of just fun because aliens are fun. And I'm sure there will be tattoo stickers and face paintings and all sorts of kid-friendly, family-friendly things. But then there will also be things that you're doing. There'll be a lineup of speakers talking about your experiences, your trauma. And so I'm just curious for you being at that kind of event where half of it is serious, legit, half of it is just having fun. How does that make you feel being at that kind of event where some people probably just think it's a total joke, but are just leaning into it to have a good time? Yeah.
It doesn't bother me. I think most experienced people I've met in this, we have the greatest sense of humor because if not, we'd break down.
Yeah.
So we learned to laugh about a lot of stuff, especially ourselves. But for that, it's to make it more family friendly. Like if you go into the town hall where the speakers are, it's definitely much more like conference setting, serious. But through the parks and stuff, there's a parade for the kids. There's a parade for the pets. Like you can dress up your pets up, and it's just we just want it to be fun and enjoyable for everybody, whether you're seriously into this or just kind of looking at it as a fun thing to do. It's run by the Kiwanis, so it's a Kiwanis fundraiser, the event. So all the money goes back to local children's charities. So that makes it worth doing, and it's okay to have a little fun and be silly with it.
Mike, we have one final question on this podcast. We ask the same question to every person who appears on Seacoast Stories, and I'll ask it to you. Mike, what is your mission?
My mission is to work myself out of a job. I want this to become such common, discussion that, there's a facility in every town where somebody can go in and get help, that I don't have to do this anymore.
That is quite the mission I have not heard yet. Thank you, Mike, for sharing it, for being you, and for joining me today. If you would like to learn more about Mike's story, you can check out Granite Skies by Nomar Slevin, a book based on Mike's UFO tales. You can also catch Mike on August 31st at the Exeter UFO Festival, and I'll place links to both of those in today's show notes. I have so many more questions for Mike about what he's seen, but I couldn't boil it down to one more, so that is all for today's episode. If you've made it this far, then you are the first to hear that this Thursday, I'm releasing a bonus episode with NBA player and Newcastle product, Duncan Robinson. So, until Thursday, everybody, live free or die.